And before that, I've had a kind of really varied career. So I've worked in regulation, I've worked in government communications, I peaked very early in advertising. Finexos is a really interesting software, which is, and actually very timely because of the government's current focus on financial inclusion. So my ambition for the next year is let's go make ourselves a success. And so this has been a theme through my career. I've always worked for brilliant women, but I realised that actually I was the person that I'd always looked up to. I had to be her for everybody else. And that meant
Hello and welcome back to Fintech Diaries. Today we have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Zitah McMillan, who is an experienced CEO, founder and nerd. Thank you for joining us today, Zitah.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Before we kind of kick off, it'd be great just to start with a bit of an introduction to yourself and Finexos as well, where you're the current CEO.
Thank you. So Zitah McMillan, been at Finexos nearly 3 months, have been a founder previously, founded my own little fintech, Predictive Black, which we founded and then sold, which is living a free range life somewhere else entirely now, which is delightful. And before that, I've had a kind of really varied career. So I've worked in regulation, I've worked in government communications. I peaked very early in advertising, did all the really exciting stuff, went on shoots to exotic locations. And thereafter, I think it's just been a bit downhill.
Found yourself in financial services.
I found myself in financial services. How does that happen to anyone? So Finexos is a really interesting software, which is, and actually very timely because of the government's current focus on financial inclusion. So the software is built to extract data from credit risk data, so bureau data, and look at people in a different way and say, you may traditionally have looked at this person as a bad risk, but the way we look at people with a different lens says that actually they're probably a better risk and reduce the probability of default on the downside. So it's just a really brilliant piece of technology that lenders or balance sheet providers or portfolio managers can use to say, where is the risk? How can we safely lend to more people and increase inclusion?
No, that's amazing, because so many people find it really tricky getting credit. So really helping those people in the underserved markets. That's amazing.
Yeah, and actually it's not just a UK issue. So, the brilliant thing about being in the UK is you can really focus and benefit from the fintech ecosystem, and there's a lot of support. I know we'll talk a bit about, how the system works, but actually in all sorts of different markets, this is a challenge. So I think what we've built is something that is a universal support for helping, and businesses accessing credit is going to be our thing for next year.
So you said it yourself. How does the system work? It would be great to understand a little bit more on how it does the risk assessments and what type of tools it uses to do that.
So we can access all data that a loan book, a lender has within their loan book. So we can go in one of 3 ways. So we can help lenders in real time. So if they're making a decision, so you go onto a website, let's say you're applying for a loan, and what you come into is the lender's interface, their website. Then we can sit behind it with a loan management system or independently and say, this is a safe person to lend to, using all the data that lenders currently use anyway. And then it's actually say, well, actually, you may have declined this person previously. We can look at those people as well and say, actually, they would have been a safe risk. We can also, at the other end of the system, go in and look at the risk in a loan book. So we can talk to risk directors and audit and compliance people directly and say, you think that everything has happened brilliantly at the front end, maybe it has, but are you absolutely sure where the risk is in your portfolio? Where are you most vulnerable to defaults? We can also price a book. So if the bad book, so somebody's defaulted, what does that look like? How much more value is there? What is the probability of these people paying? So we can kind of go in at 3 different points. And that actually makes the system and the software itself far more usable for clients because they can kind of steer it whichever way they would like it to be.
And what kind of data sets do you use to help facilitate those kind of conversations? I guess, is it open banking?
We can use open banking.
Yeah.
Not as many people use open. I love open banking. Yeah. I've been a huge advocate for open banking through the open banking, the OBIE from when that was around. But actually not as many people access open banking data. And I think that will change. That's going to be one of those things that just changes over time. But we'll use credit risk bureau data. And so a lender will always use that data in part of their scorecard. So they'll have a scorecard that's built, a rules engine that sits alongside it. So we can access the bureau data that the lender accesses and look at it and say, we would make this decision. Either we agree it's the right risk, or we think this person is a safer risk than you do, because of the way we look at the factors within the CRA data, the credit risk assessment data. And then we'll weight things and say, this actually is a better indicator of repayment than maybe you have understood it to be, or this is a better indicator of default than maybe you've looked at. So we're inviting clients to think a bit differently about the data they're used to seeing on a daily basis.
Yes, definitely. And it's amazing because you're helping the lenders and the businesses, but you're also helping the end consumer as well. So it's almost kind of like a win-win for everyone across the board.
Absolutely. And I'm super excited by the Financial Inclusion Committee that was announced and the government's interest in driving financial inclusion. And actually, although the subcommittees around credit haven't been announced, or they will be announced, it will be really important to see how the industry engages with the inclusion agenda, because actually lenders are there to make money. That they're a business, they're not a charity. You've got credit unions who operate differently, or community development initiatives. Lenders fundamentally have balance sheet providers to satisfy, and they have to make a return. So they're not a charity. So encouraging them to lend in a more inclusive way, it's not a gimme.
Yeah.
They don't have to.
And will that initiative be putting some regulation around that, or will that just be kind of encouraging and bringing people together to discuss that?
Don't know yet. Don't know.
Yeah, still early stages.
Yeah. And actually, it's a good initiative. And if people do get behind it, I think usually the way it works is the big banks are kind of pushed into it first, because they're the ones that, more people lend money from. And it will be interesting to see how that flows through, and whether lenders take the initiative themselves and say, although we're not forced to currently, we want to be good actors within the regulatory system, and therefore we will have a view of this is what inclusion would look like for us. And actually test whether they can still do the right thing but do it profitably. That's what I'd like to help them
That's
with.
your ideal situation, isn't it? And we have things like the consumer duty regulation, which has already started to kind of move the needle on a bit of that.
Although it's going to be interesting how that, again, I think it will only be when something hasn't worked and, the regulator steps in and says, this didn't work, therefore you are going to be fined X or whatever, which is the usual way regulation takes its path. And then I think the industry will go, oh, okay, we probably do need to do a bit more on this. I think it's an emerging thing. Compliance is looking at it. Every new piece of regulation goes through compliance first.
I think that's why Finexos is so critical, I guess, within that whole realm of understanding what is your risk appetite as a lender, and helping them kind of understand that a little bit better. Because I think lending policy, it can go either way, right? It either supports that, inclusion, or it actually doesn't. So really helping to evolve that with the lender, I think, is really important.
And what's the commercial value to the lender? So I think it's okay to say, we can help you lend more safely, but you've got to be able to put a value on it for them to say, well, if you want to grow your loan book from X to Y, you will have to attract X number more people, because you reject this number. So if you attract 1,000, but you only accept 100, there's 900 that you've already paid to get to your site, but then you've not converted. So how can you help them extract more value out of people that ordinarily they would say no to? Is that in the margins of their risk appetite? Is that just because we look at people differently? But there has to be an open-mindedness, a willingness, because they're not doing bad business, they're doing good business. So you've got to find that commercial imperative.
Yeah, definitely. And so you've been at Finexos for 3 months now. So talk us through, what does the first 3 months being a CEO look like, and what are your initial thoughts, and also kind of thoughts for the future as well?
I think it's always interesting. So I've been a CEO a couple of times, and having founded my own fintech and known everything about everything, where every single, lever was that I could play with, going into a business that's established, even though it's still small and it's still a fintech, you're sort of learning all over again. And, finding out from the team what they've tried, what's not been tried, who have we tried talking to, what hasn't worked, what has worked, what could we be doing differently, better, where are our opportunities? And then finding the place where you spend most of your time, because in a small company, you don't just get to kind of go, oh, well, I'll set the vision and the strategy and everyone will follow. You literally, you talk about it, you roll your sleeves up, you write the objectives, you set the key results. you work with a team, you are involved in the entirety of that process. You know, I want to know everything that is happening, and only when I can't possibly know everything that's happening will I know I've been successful. Because then we'll be at a scale. So my ambition for the next year is, let's go make ourselves a success. We know we're good.
Yeah, amazing. I think when you, like you say, you kind of have to wear a lot of hats, you have to get your hands dirty. What sort of skills, I guess, have you learnt throughout being a CEO a couple of times, or however many times you have been a CEO, are really key to being a CEO?
I think, and it's different for everyone, and in different organisations, you have to be a different version of whichever person you know you take to work. I think for me, my attitude whenever I start anything is, and I did this with Finexos, is I have this kind of AAA mindset of I'll absorb and I'll assess. But when you're in absorption mode, you have to listen. You've got to be able to ask good questions. You have to listen really hard, not just so you can reply, but so you can really understand what's happening. And then you have to be ruthlessly critical in the assessment, because there's a reason why you have been brought in. There's a reason why you were the person that was chosen to come and do this, and why you chose to do it. And then you act. And that's, you know, generally the hardest part. But the clarity of how you do it, the transparency of what it is you're thinking. So I've always written a weekly note, but I send that out to everyone and I have done in pretty much every organisation I've ever worked in. I've always written a Friday note. And sometimes they're not very nice. Sometimes it's like, actually, I've had a really tough week this week. We've had some really challenging feedback. Other times it's brilliant. Had a really great week, met all these potential clients. This is what I'm hearing, you know, this is what I'm doing the following week. But that transparency, so that everybody knows where your head's at and what you're thinking. Clarity of thinking, being clear in how you express what you think people need to be doing and why, and setting them on that journey, but giving them the right tools and support to get there.
No, that's amazing. And I think when everyone in the organisation understands the vision and actually, like you say, understands where you're at, has that transparency there, I think it makes people feel more bought in, and they want to, you know, deliver even better results, and everyone's there kind of aligned to the same goal and mission. So
hopefully that's the plan. Also, it should mean that you don't have to tell people what to do. That's the dream, right? So we're going through the process now of setting objectives and key results. Everybody loves their own thing, don't they? I quite like an OKR rather than a KPI, whatever other acronym you think about. So I like objectives and key results, mainly because if we set an objective and write the key results, everybody then looks at it and goes, and so what's my objective as part of that? And everybody contributes to writing the objective. So there's no kind of top down, I think you should do this. It's like, here's what I'm doing. Now you tell me what you should be doing, because you know your job better than I do, to support this objective. And that's, I think that's really empowering, where everybody goes, oh, okay, so wait, I have to do this myself? Yes, you do.
That's amazing. And you obviously mentioned you've been CEO quite a few times, been in the fintech industry at different companies. You spoke around, obviously, there's the Financial Inclusion Initiative, but I know we chatted before around just UK fintech in general. And whilst there's, you know, some amazing communities, amazing things going on, more probably could be done by all individuals involved, the government. What are your thoughts on that in terms of what more we could be doing to push fintech in the UK forward more?
So I think, and the government's really interested on this. The Treasury had a consultation paper out recently that we've contributed to, which is, what more could we do? You know, how else can we help? Which is all brilliant. And so things like the SEIS and the EIS schemes from an investor perspective, how do you make it easier for investors to invest? Angel investors or any other investors, we could be investors. How do you make it as easy and as commercially viable for people to invest? And I think one of the things that we've not been historically great at is certainty. And if you sort of wave a little thing around over a scheme and go, well, maybe we'll keep it, maybe we won't, people don't invest. Because if you don't know with clarity what the tax benefit is to you, you don't spend your money. So we need to make sure that those sorts of housekeeping things, you know, there's a reason why the US gets a lot of people listing over there when they get to that size, because there's absolute certainty that these are the rules. We're all here to support growth, you know, and they know what that means. And I don't feel we fully know what that means yet as a country. I think incentivizing government departments to work with fintechs actually would be great. So there's a new procurement bill, but that will hopefully transform the way government engages, because they're the single biggest spender in the country. They're the biggest buyer of anything. Now, there is a process and system for us to apply for things like that. But if you have, there's all sorts of rules. Like you can't apply if you've got less than this in turnover, or you can't do, or you can't do.
You don't want to add those barriers, do you?
Right. Those sorts of things where they think a little bit more commercially about, if you really want to encourage and give fintechs a proper chance at stuff, let them in on some of these procurement bids. Yes, maybe partner with a big provider, but otherwise those sorts of things. Accept technology.
Yeah. I think it's the cost of not doing it as well. It's so big, because we will end up falling behind in all areas of innovation and attracting businesses to the UK.
And attracting talent.
And talent as well. Yeah.
And actually it's an interesting point on the talent, because that's one of the questions that was in this consultation. Like, do you think we're well equipped to attract talent to the UK? Let me think about the immigration and the visa rules. No, not particularly. We're not really. Sorry. We can do it on a limited basis, but it's not clear that that's a kind of imperative for people. So why wouldn't you set up in France or Germany or the US?
Yeah, definitely. If you get better support, better things to go with it.
And I guess speaking on investment a little bit, so you have been on the other side a couple of times. What are the challenges of seeking investment and raising funds as a founder?
If you knew how to do it really well, what an astonishing gift that would be. I think the problem for raising funds is that it remains a little bit who you know. So if you're really well connected, you've got people in wealth management or people that you can go to and go, I've just got this idea. It's a bit of a scrappy piece of paper idea, but I need some seed investment. Can I have $500,000? So I think the system's a little bit weird. It sort of still feels a bit who you know, actually. Female founders routinely have less investment. And it's brilliant that there's a lot of funds now who are specifically aiming at female founders. Just feels like we shouldn't have to, but we do. So accept where we are. But there is an art to raising funds, and actually knowing what your investors are looking for. Do your homework. There's no point going in and going, well, I'm going to change the world with this, if all they actually care about is an ROI of like 15, multiplier or something at the end. Focus on that. So I think being really clear on who you're going to, and actually talk to people who've done it. Go find those people. And going back to your earlier point about the ecosystem, go find people who've raised that you can ask the daft questions of, so you look silly in front of them and not in front of the people who may give you money. That's all okay. And the other thing that I really benefited from is I was previously in the Microsoft for Startups community. That was brilliant, because you could make as many mistakes as you liked in terms of speaking to all the Microsoft support team, because they were so good in the startup world, and they would be really helpful. Get in those places and go practice your pitching. Because pitching is everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and how did you find it as well? Because like you said, you were building Predictive Black in the midst of COVID, so you've got the challenges of maybe not as much support as you'd like from the UK government, but then you're also going through a pandemic and also starting a business, raising funds. What was that
ridiculous,
journey?
actually.
That's a lot,
So I feel a bit stupid now. I think I should reflect on those life choices.
Well, you obviously did pretty well, because you exited.
We did exit, we did. And actually, weirdly, I think people had a bit more time, because suddenly everyone was at home. So people who I was finding hard to get into their diaries, say, please, can I show you my fabulous software? I promise it won't be a waste of your time. Suddenly, they're all at home anyway. And so I'm like, actually, if you get your own coffee and just give me half an hour on Teams, is that okay? And it went from, I can't get a meeting, to, okay, I now have no time to talk to anyone else today. I've got so many meetings. So in a weird way, that helped. And actually, the Innovate grant fund was really good. The paperwork is a shocker, but we got support through Innovate. We got a grant from those guys through the pandemic. So that was good. So I do think certain things came out really well. You just have to be prepared for the paperwork for that.
Get through that.
Yeah. But actually, there were so many other businesses in the same boat that it felt like we were all trying to figure it out together. and actually it wasn't as bad doing it, through a pandemic. It just, you do reach a point where you're like, oh God, I've got to go out now and meet people again.
What is this?
How does that work? And actually it's less efficient. You've got to spend time on the train or whatever. It's like, oh no. But I think the takeaways I would have from it is actually it's not something everyone would have enjoyed, because it is a tough thing to start a business, build the business, you build a team, and all that camaraderie you try and get with a team when you don't get to see each other face to face. You're just on a screen. It's a challenge. It is a challenge.
Absolutely. And I guess just talking about Predictive Black, where did the idea start? Like, how did you even?
Yeah. So my friend and colleague Mike and I, we've been working together for quite a long time. And we were always tormented by the cash management system. I mean, literally, it was the bane of our lives. We had 7 businesses in 5 countries, across Europe, different currencies. Very, very exciting, all run on crazy spreadsheets, like the sort of spreadsheet that give you a nosebleed. It's like, I didn't even want to look at the spreadsheet. But we were owned by a US company, and the treasury guy was in the US, fabulous guy. And no matter how well we tried, we could not get the numbers I thought I had in the bank to match to the number he thought we had. Crazy. So then they sort of gave us this huge cash management system that none of us really wanted because it cost a fortune. So between Mike and I, we were like, we could probably do this for ourselves. We could do this better. We could do this better. So we had this sort of germ of an idea. And then we were introduced to a guy who was thinking about data and wanted to build this kind of huge data thing. And he had a tech friend. And so it all came together in this kind of crazy way.
Good timing.
Yeah. And actually, but it's a hard thing to build something from scratch.
Yeah.
Be much easier just to kind of layer onto someone else's tech.
Well, that's it. There's one thing having a great idea, but actually saying, right, we're actually going to make this into a business. We're going to hire people, make this into something. I think that takes a lot of courage, I feel, to do that.
How did you make that decision, actually? Because you were in another role before. So
well, we just sold that business. So we led the sale of the business. So the company that we were working for was sort of retrenched to the US, and we sold the UK and the European arm. So we were kind of free reign. We were like, oh, is now a good moment?
Yeah.
So with this sort of blithe naivety of people who've never done this before, we were like, yeah, let's give it a go. Yeah, why not? And it was such an amazing learning curve. Yeah, so it's you kind of found it, and then it's like, okay, well, now we've done it. We've got to get someone to pay for it.
Yeah.
That's kind of exciting. So then you relearn again. It's like, how do I pitch? How do I sell? All of that stuff. Because you are everyone and everything in that moment.
Like Penise was saying, so many different hats that you've got to wear, and so many different skills that you will have learned over that 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. And so we've talked about a bit on Finexos, a bit on Predictive Black, but you've obviously had such a varied and amazing career around that as well. I think we'd love to know how it started. Like, what were some of those first roles that you got into, and what were the things that you learned on the way?
Highs and lows as well.
Yeah,
highs and lows.
You are.
Ooh, highs and lows. Okay.
Any lessons learned?
Yeah, I love a lessons learned. It's my favourite thing. So I started out. So I actually got a temporary role, local employer, because I was taking a year before I went to university, and I just got stuck in, basically. And then I was working in HR, and I was rubbish at HR. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like all the kind of weird people thing. I was like, why have I got to go and talk to people? It's very unusual. So I got moved into marketing. They're like, I think you'd be very much more at home.
We'll get you out of HR.
Probably because actually I'm better at doing that sort of thing now. I'm a lot tougher than I was then. I was like, I don't want to fire that person. So I moved into marketing, and I had the most amazing boss. And so this has been a theme through my career. I've always worked for brilliant women. The maddest people, but absolutely fabulous to learn from and real role models. Yeah. So I moved into marketing, and I had this amazing boss, and she was like a powerhouse in marketing. We did the national advertising, right? It was like brilliant. Chickens Going Cheap was a genuine advert. So from there I moved into advertising. I was like, well, this sounds like good fun. Yeah. So advertising was great. Moved to London, worked at a big agency, did all the great things. But then you get promoted if you're lucky, to the point where you don't go to any of the really exciting shoots, and you only really get talked to by clients when things have gone wrong. And you're just like,
all the fun stuff you're enjoying.
Do the doing.
I was like, I could do that again. And then, kids come along, and it's like, it's quite antisocial. So I had my second child, and I took some time off, and I was like, what am I going to be now? Who am I now? what do I do next? You know, that sort of moment of complete panic where you think, well, I don't think I can go back to what I was doing because I just don't think I care enough anymore. And that for me has always been that moment of, if I can't meet your energy, if I can't care the way you care, I'm probably not the right fit for you. So you've got to know that about yourself. And I was like, what can I do? What can I do? And then I was talking to a friend about just communications more generally. And I was like, I could do that. That's what I should do. I don't do that. So I applied for a role at the Department for Work and Pensions with no expectation of getting this job. But I really, really, really wanted it. I literally read a job description, I don't know if you've ever done this, and gone, that is me. I can do this and amazing. I will be brilliant at it. I promise. So I got interviewed by this other amazing woman who, I was the only person who wasn't in the civil service. I was the only woman. And I came from an advertising background, so I had zero reasons for them to say yes. So they appointed me.
Amazing.
Must have smashed that interview.
I know, right? I know. So I had a brilliant time, was working in there when the change of the last government. So when it went to a coalition, which was crazy times to be in the civil service. I didn't realise how crazy it was. And then moved into financial services regulation. And ladies, I have never looked back. Financial services just was I was like, I love this. This is awesome. Weird. It's a weird thing.
Crazy.
So many people we've spoken to, it's a similar story. No one's like gone out of uni or into the first job being like, I want to be in financial services. I've somehow landed in it, but then thought, I actually enjoy it.
Yeah,
like,
I can do this. I'm pretty good at this. Yeah, I know. And so here I still am in financial services, just in a different way.
Yeah. That's amazing to know that you've had some amazing women role models, because that really,
I think that really changed the game.
Totally.
And particularly for, when you do, obviously coming into financial services, it's very male dominated. So it's like having that women to look up to throughout your career will have definitely helped you kind of make a charge in this field as well. I think you definitely need that.
And actually you become the woman that you
That's
looked up to. Yeah.
Exactly.
So when I moved into the regulator, there were some brilliant women on the exec who I could definitely look up to. But then when I left and went into a lending business, and there weren't any women actually. The only woman I had was someone who worked for me who was brilliant. Also Welsh, I'm Welsh, so the maddest nights out in Finland you can possibly imagine. But I realised that actually I was the person that I'd always looked up to. I had to be her for everybody else, and that meant making sure that I lived the values that I found had been important to me. So, and that actually is a really it's an interesting moment in your life, in your career, when you go, oh, it's me now. Yeah, I've got to be her. Right, okay.
Yeah, and you realise what an impact you have on people's lives. Like you say, probably those roles you did so well, you accelerated in those roles because you had amazing people who you looked up to. Yeah. Like you say, you're now doing that same thing for other people, which must be a great thing to know.
It really is, actually. It is. And also being unashamedly that person. So when I was at the regulator, I came in late on a Wednesday morning, not if the world was on fire, but I would have breakfast with my kids on a Wednesday morning, and I would leave at 5 if I could, so I could go home for bath time, and then I'd work in the evenings, and people, my team would see me leave, and I'm like, I have to go. I've got kids to see. I am available, but I also need to go and be that person. So how do you get your work-life balance genuinely aligned? And what I got through the feedback was it wasn't just the mums in the department who were going; it was the dads. The dads were like, oh, I think that's okay. I can do that too. Yeah. So suddenly you're like, okay, I have helped you. This whole idea that everybody has to sit at their desks for 100 hours a day. No.
So outdated. Amazing. I really just want to understand a little bit more about kind of, you talked a little bit about your career and how varied it's been, and really the skills that you've learned along the way have been so varied, and being in different fields I'm sure will have had such an impact on that. Is there any kind of like key moment that really sticks out for you?
I think so. There's a couple of key moments where I had an opportunity and I had a choice to make. Like, is this the right decision for me? Is this the time that I should go and do that? And having the opportunity to talk that through with people was always kind of one of those things. You kind of go, do I make this leap? Do I not? I think one of them was, do I leave advertising? Is this am I really not that person anymore? Because it was that I loved it so much. And so to move out of advertising from a world, it was the only world I truly knew. And that's where all my friends worked, and my entire network was in that world, was actually quite a big moment of choice, and having to sit and really properly work through who was I? Who was I going to be? And what would that mean going forward, actually? And then the second one was, do I start my own business? What sort of madness is that? And why would I do that? And am I doing it for the right reasons? If I don't do it now, will I ever? And what will be the path, so those big moments are, and you can't even, in that moment it's a big decision as well.
And they sound really risky as well, so I feel like you have to be quite the risk taker to do.
I didn't know I was, though. This is what's really interesting. In hindsight, I look back and go, really? You crazy fool. But in the moment, you're kind of like, well, what are the choices now? If I'm looking at a 4-box grid, like, what are my 4 boxes saying that, go here, go there?
And it sounds like you've been guided by, like you were saying, is my energy here? Am I genuinely interested in it? And if I am, I will give my all. And it sounds like you'll succeed. And clearly that has worked for you throughout. But it feels like that's what has kind of been your compass and North Star going forward.
Yeah. And actually, I genuinely think if you're more honest with yourself about your own motivation and how much of yourself you're able to give to something, it would change the way you engage with things. People wouldn't stay as long in jobs that they hated because you're not doing it for the right reasons. And some people don't have a choice, and that's okay. But for me, if I know in myself that I'm not being the right level of energy, I can't do the job that I am required to do, then I'm not the right person for it. And there's no point pretending.
I think that's fabulous advice. Genuinely, I think really checking in with yourself like more regularly than not, I think is such a key.
And being honest.
And being honest.
It's so easy to lie to yourself.
Yes,
it's much easier to lie to yourself than you realise. Actually, it's like, no, of course this is fabulous. Look at my paycheck, or look at the places I go. It's not about
and thinking about feeling rather than those kind of it's
not what other people see about you either. It's like really easy. Everybody looks at you and kind of goes, you must be so successful, look at you dress really well, you do this, you went here. Irrelevant.
Exactly, it's how you actually feel. And we've touched on it a little bit, but I'm keen just to quickly touch on women in financial services, women in fintech. I think especially, we've noticed it since I think we've started our careers. It's definitely getting better, and you see far many more women in senior roles and across financial services and fintech. It's still not where it needs to be, and you still sometimes do feel there's like the token woman on the board or involved from a senior leadership perspective. What do you think we can do to get more women involved? Or what do you think could be done to kind of move the needle more to where it needs to be?
I think it has to feel like an industry that you want to participate in, that you aren't going to look at and go, well, actually, all of the noise in the system is it's really hard, you don't get investment, things even I've talked about, it's actually tricky to do, to come in. And actually financial services in its holistic sense is much better than it ever was. But then when you go down and narrow the funnel into the fintech space, you lose women almost consistently throughout, there's not as many. And it's weird for me because I know a lot of women in fintech because that's who I've surrounded myself with. So when somebody said to me, oh, not many women, I was like, oh, you're joking, they're everywhere. But then I'm sort of like, oh, hang on. They're not, are they? They're everywhere because that's my little bubble. And I've joined those communities. But I think it's like with any tech business in a smaller part of subset of technology is you're usually in smaller entities. Usually it's long hours. Usually the pay's not great. So if you're on a career progression in a larger financial services, why would you step out? Why? There's no incentive. So I think we've got to figure out a way of re-incentivizing it and helping people find a place, either to found their own businesses, that's an amazing journey to go on, or being the person that hires more women as well. I'm always on the lookout for who is the right talent, but I'm focused on, are you the right talent, irrespective. So it's how do we encourage people to think more, don't just hire who you see, or, bring other people in.
Yeah, I think obviously being a champion for yourself and having, surrounding yourself with the communities, it will kind of help to push more and more people into this space. And who knows, I guess hopefully in a few years we'll be seeing a lot more females.
Hopefully, if that's what they want. I mean, the thing that I've been ruminating over, which sounds very grand, doesn't it? I've been ruminating. Is that what women want in a sort of weird sort of way? Yeah. Because actually, you shouldn't feel that you've got to kind of boost the numbers. You know, it's not a numbers game.
Yeah,
in a
no,
sense.
exactly.
You know,
we don't want it to be a checkbox.
No, don't be the tick box. Don't be the kind of the diversity hire or whatever. But actually, the rise of femtech and health tech, and there's a lot of female founders. It's like, well, they're all having a great time over there.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe fintech is just not the place they think they're going to have a great time. Okay, well, we can help that by kind of showing that it's not too bad over here, honest. But just maybe it's not the subset of the industry that people are kind of that excited.
Definitely.
I don't know.
And that's it. You just got to make sure that it's not a case of there's barriers or
Exactly.
there's those negative things.
Yes.
But you don't want to just be hiring people for the sake of gender or other things like that. So it's striking the balance.
There are some amazing women in compliance and risk, though. That's a whole different subset. Just saying.
Oh, wow. In financial services. Yeah, no, you're right, actually.
There's some brilliant ladies out there.
It's been amazing.
Yeah.
The discussion's super interesting to hear about your career. I think it's amazing, everything you've achieved. And what we like to do at the end of every podcast episode is we like to ask kind of 3 fire round questions that just kind of sums everything up. So the first one is, what would you like to be known for?
For founding a business, leading a small fintech, more attractive to more people like me. Young or old. I'm old, but young, preferably.
Amazing.
Just like making it easier, making it feel more attractive, making it doable.
Yeah. Amazing. The second question is, if there's one thing you could change about the industry, what would it be? I feel like I know what you're going to say. Talked a little bit about it.
Fairer funding.
Yeah.
Fairer funding. Don't be biased. Like, look at the actual product proposition. Don't look at the person presenting it.
Yeah. And the final question is, what is a book, podcast, show that has inspired you that you
apart from this one?
Yeah,
obviously. So, I mean, everybody reads loads of books, right, about leadership and stuff. But the one I read, and I got to meet the authors, was a book called Leadership on the Line by Marty Linsky and Ronald Heifetz, I think his name is. And it's one of those books that makes you go, oh, my days. Yeah. So it's how to survive, basically, being a leader. Like, is your actual life on the line if you're trying to lead? And everybody talks about, I want to be a manager, I want to be a leader. Do you? It's pretty tough out there. And Leadership on the Line really helped me frame how I approach leadership. What type of person am I as a leader, and how do I do it? And what am I looking for? And what are people looking at when they look at me? So I highly recommend it. It's a really good book.
Yeah, thank you again,
Thank
Zitah.
you
It's been so amazing.
It's been so great.
Thank you very much for having me.